Coming up on this week's show, Sonic and Mario ported to the Amstrad and the Spectrum.
My favourite gaming movie has been tampered with.
And we're joined in the studio by the mother of Lara Croft, Heather Gibson.
This week's show is brought to you by Retro Gamer, the essential guide to classic games. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 198, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And welcome to this week's show. Now, before we get into it, I should pre-warn you that Joe has had a kind of monster in the car on the way over tonight. So
I was like, what's he saying about me this time?
And he's been practicing metal lyrics, screaming in the car. Anything could happen on this week's show.
Anything could happen. Yeah, I have had a can of Monster. I've been screaming like a monster in the car as well because I've got a gig tomorrow. Yeah.
You might need to rein it in though, because we do have a guest coming in the studio this week.
We do, and I don't want to slap her while I'm getting all animated with my arms and stuff.
Well, this is, I guess we actually met over the weekend. Now, we went to a really cool little event, not far from where we record the podcast in Derby.
Yeah.
And this was a cinema called Quad. It's like a really big venue, a couple of cinemas in there and an exhibition area. And this was an event called Ramfest.
Yeah, this was an awesome little event. So they had the legendary Rob Hubbard there, who came and did an absolutely amazing talk about C64 music, but also the kind of orchestral music that we've been covering on this show.
And you may have seen us sharing a glass of wine with him on our Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah, it was great fun. And
Name
it was also in partnership with the guys from Retro Computer Museum in Leicester. And they had a Tomb Raider panel there. And this is where we met Heather. And I just thought Heather's stories were so amazing. We need to get her on to tell us all about the development of kind of Tomb Raider 1. You know, she invented the Croft Manor.
And the level design as well, Tomb Raider 1 and 2.
Yep.
And we actually find out in the interview, and that's coming up soon, she actually had quite a big role in the kind of characteristics of Lara Croft. She was the original voice of Lara Croft.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting interview, and I'm just really excited.
I think what was really fantastic as well is she was really on board. I love that she's come down into the actual studio as well. Really, really, really enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, because I mean, we record this show in Nottingham. Derby's about half an hour away. So, you know, she made the trip over on a cold November Wednesday evening to sit in the studio with us over a cup of tea and share some of these amazing stories about a time at companies like Rare and Core. And obviously, most of the interview is going to be about Tomb Raider, because it has to be. So if you're a fan of Tomb Raider, hang around for this one. You're going to find out some really interesting stories. Heather Gibson coming up on the Retro Hour podcast in around 15 minutes from now. And we do have some great news stories to talk about. Before we get into that, though, let's give a huge thank you to our very good supporter. And it's so amazing that these guys are back on board with the Retro Hour podcast. This is our friends at the legendary Retro Gamer magazine. Now, Retro Gamer, of course, anyone that listens to our show needs to read Retro Gamer, the only magazine dedicated to all aspects of retro gaming. They bring you backstage, tell you everything that happened behind the scenes of your favourite games, chat to the developers, find out what the biggest names in the industry have got to say about the games they made and the legacy they've left, and also get to find out facts you didn't know about the games you grew up playing. Now, it's a really good time that Retro Gamer are on board with us, because it's a rather special, monumental occasion for Retro Gamer. They've just released issue 200.
Yeah. Oh, my God, this issue is epic. Like, first off, you get a free CD, and that's always nice with a magazine. But as we're talking about these orchestral versions of video games, this is a soundtrack, very orchestral, of Turrican, and it's actually done by Chris Holzbeck. So this is like an exclusive little kind of CD, audio CD, and then you get this huge poster as well, which is a really cool piece of custom pixel art that seems to have every single system in there possible. So you can spend your time hunting through, finding the little references and stuff.
Well, issue 200 really is a celebration of the entire history of video games, going back to like the early 60s.
Yeah, this entire issue is just one massive celebration of just like the complete history of gaming, from, you know, those early kind of computers, then to the consoles. Absolutely love it. One of my favourite articles here in the middle is the revenge of the 90s consoles, where it just kind of goes through, you know, just this resurgence of, like, you know, Nintendo came back, Sega came back. There's a little bit about the Jaguar, even the Wonder Swan, stuff like that. Absolutely amazing issue.
And they've interviewed so many people. Nolan Bushnell's in there, Trip Hawkins.
Oh, yeah, it's like a complete plethora of absolutely amazing interviews. And, you know, you don't realise how many amazing interviews they've had until you look at it in this kind of timeline form.
So make sure you get hold of this. It's a 200th special issue of Retro Gamer magazine, the essential guide to classic games. And, of course, we've hooked you up with an amazing offer. Don't we always do that?
As always.
You don't get these offers anywhere else. Now, listen, this is what we want to give you. If you subscribe today to Retro Gamer Magazine, you will get a free 8-bit DOE controller of your choice. Now, we've talked about these on the show before, and these are these really amazing, nicely made retro-style controllers. And these are Bluetooth, so these work with stuff like, your PC, your Mac, Linux, Android, even on the Switch as well.
Yeah, I found that really interesting that they're compatible to the Switch. It's amazing.
And they've got stuff like NES, GameCube, Mega Drive, Game Boy editions that you can pick from as well. So this is the offer we've got for you. Now, claim this right now while it's on. You can get 6 months' worth of Retro Gamer Magazine for just £25 and a free, beautifully styled Bluetooth controller worth up to 30 quid, completely free. So this is what you need to do. Open a new browser right now, tap this in, myfavouriteMagazines.co.uk/retro 8-bit DOE. So that is retro, number 8, BITDO. myfavouriteMagazines.co.uk/retro 8-bit DOE. And I'll put that link in our show notes as well. Thanks to our very good friends at Retro Gamer, the essential guide to classic games. Now, lots of stories doing the rounds this week we'll get into in a sec. Let's also give a huge thank you to our loyal supporters as well. Every week we roll out the red carpet on the Retro Hour Hall of Fame to those people who found it in their hearts to show a little bit of love to the Retro Hour podcast and allow us to keep doing this show for you every week and help us with the running costs of the show. And for making a donation of any amount, we accept it via PayPal through our website at theretrohour.com, or you can just do PayPal at theretrohour.com from your app. You will get a mention in a future episode in the Hall of Fame. Like this week,
Niall Bullets,
Resourceful Restoration,
Michael Vrede,
and Scott Marsden,
who all made donations into the running of the show. Honestly, guys, that's so appreciated. And around this time of year when, because we started the show in January, didn't we, about 5 years ago soon, so all our renewal costs are coming up soon, so this is very well timed. If you'd like to help us out and throw something into the tip jar, you'll find that on our website at theretrohour.com. Now, before Heather joins us in the studio to get some never-heard-before stories about games like Tomb Raider 1 and 2, let's talk about a few of the headlines that have been making the blogs and the magazines and the videos in the world of retro gaming this week, including a Pac-Man-inspired maze that might give you nightmares.
Yeah, so I found this one, stumbled across this one. So in Florida, across the pond, they've set up a life-size Pac-Man-inspired maze where you literally get to run around as Pac-Man, run around the maze with the staff who are dressed up as the ghosts chasing you. You get 3 lives, and they actually run around after you in the maze at night, and it just looks just a complete hybrid of absolutely fantastic and absolutely terrifying at the same time.
Have you seen that rubbish film called Pixels?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so that Pac-Man thing in there where they turn the streets into Pac-Man game,
Yeah.
I thought that was the best thing about the film. But
Yeah.
this is cool that it's really interactive. And Counter-Strike, we had Min Lee on, and they'd actually recreated Dust in real life, a Counter-Strike map. So it's good to see that they're creating these kind of game worlds in reality. It's pretty mad, isn't it?
Actually, think about Pac-Man, and actually the premise of that game is pretty terrifying. You're getting chased around by these ghosts. It's like through dead ends and everything, and it is actually, when you think about it, quite a terrifying concept.
Munching pills in a dark room as well.
So do you think they'd have like individual personalities, like Pinky and Blinky, didn't they have individual? One will be faster.
That's interesting. Yeah, it doesn't say that. Like, it doesn't. Will they be? I forget the correct colours for it. But yeah, like the pink one always does the same route, doesn't it? And one of them actually chases you.
They'll probably train the ghosts.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it'll be that authentic, but it's reopening on October 10th, 2020. And what I think's really cool is it's only $15. Obviously, it's in America. It's only $15 a ticket, which is quite interesting because usually these kind of things are really expensive.
Yeah.
So it looks like they even have like a huge celebration of Pac-Man, like a festival. They have all the arcade machines set up with bottles of beer and everything like that. So, you get to run around and everything, then you go have your lemonade to recover.
And after that, apparently they've got like an 80s themed pixel room you can check out.
Exactly.
And stuff,
and they've got all the games cabinets set up. So it looks really cool.
So if you want to find out more about that, I'll shove a link in our show notes at theretrohour.com. And you need to check out these videos. Now, these have been all over Facebook, actually, this week. I've seen it in a load of groups. The first one I saw is the GX4000. Now, for people that might not be familiar with that
is this the Amstrad machine?
This was Amstrad's attempt at making a home video game console. I think it came out, I want to say, 1990 or thereabouts. And it was that era where, Commodore tried it as well with the Commodore 64 console that, essentially just a version of their home computer.
The GS.
Yeah. Amstrad did the same thing. It was essentially an Amstrad machine. Took the keyboard off, put a cartridge slot on there as well. Thought, that'll be enough. That'll compete with Sega and Nintendo. Obviously, as we know, massive flop. But it turns out now there might actually be a game that you want to get on your GX 4000 because someone has ported Sonic the Hedgehog.
This
to
is
the GX
awesome.
4000.
We all know that the Amstrad scene is absolutely kicking off with stuff that's happening at the moment. And it is really like a kind of underused system. You know, the fact that you can get Sonic running smoothly on it is fantastic.
I think what's interesting about it is it's a port of Sonic the Hedgehog, but it's kind of like a fan-made version of it.
Yeah.
And it looks like, it's weird because it looks better than the Master System versions of Sonic.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you can tell it's not got blast processing. It is a little bit slower than the Mega Drive version, but it does look quite cool. It does look pretty nice.
Maybe it's closer to the Game Gear version.
Yeah, you know what? It reminded me of that, but it's weird because it just looks that little bit smoother and a little bit nicer than those versions.
And there's literally no parallax on the back, is there? But, you know.
Well, this was an 8-bit machine, you know. And, and this runs at full frame rating of 50 hertz. Apparently it's 40 colours in here as well. And the fact they've got it running that well, and they're going to be releasing this for the Amstrad GX 4000 and the Amstrad Plus machines as well. And they reckon this is going to be a full game that's going to be out at the end of 2020.
Wow.
Now, the thing about it is, at the moment, you can kind of check out this preview. I'll put a video in the show notes. And as we know, Sega are normally quite good about fan projects, and I imagine that'll be left up, and if people want to play it and download it, I can't imagine Sega are going to have a problem with it at all. Maybe not the same can be said about the next story, which is, quite coincidentally, Mario has been ported to the Sinclair Spectrum. Now, check out this video that I'll also put in the show notes as well. Now, it actually looks much better than I ever imagined it could. It is, it's a work in progress at the moment. They've only done like a small bit of the game. But this essentially is Mario running on the ZX Spectrum.
It's funny because they've still got colour clash, which is really cool to see. Mario with a little bit of like green stuck on him.
I think what's really interesting about this one is it's slower.
Yeah.
But it's not like notably like, you've got to watch it for a good 30 seconds to see the kind of like, obviously the colours and the graphics are different, but to actually see that kind of difference in the gameplay with the Sonic one on the Amstrad, it's clear straight away, okay, that's not Sonic on the Mega Drive. It's, it doesn't play the same. Well, obviously this isn't clearly Mario on the Nintendo, but it doesn't play too dissimilar, to the actual Nintendo version, which I think is really funny.
I mean,
actually.
obviously, you haven't got the background colours and everything. It's all black. Sound effects,
There we go.
It does seem a bit bare, but I guess if you think of other games like Jet Set Willy, how much stuff is going on at the screen at the same time, to get this smoothness, you're probably going to have it a bit kind of empty.
Well, this is running at 50 frames a second.
Wow.
And it's got side-scrolling as well, which, you think about that. I remember a lot of the old Specky games, they'd have side-scrolling, but it kind of redrawn, it was quite slow.
Yeah.
And this does look, as smooth as the NES version in terms of
there's no like
scrolling.
screen tearing or anything like that.
So that's incredible. I mean, at the moment, there is a free download. It's not a full game. We know when anyone tries to do stuff like this, Nintendo would generally issue a takedown the day after. So I wouldn't be surprised if this demo's gone by the time this show comes out. Just the way Nintendo roll. But maybe they can do something like Gianna Sisters back in the day, just change the character a bit. I mean, there's a great engine here for a good game.
Next week we're going to be talking about, Gianna Sisters has come out on the ZX Spectrum.
So you got to check this video out. I mean, whether the downloadable demo will still be available when the show comes out on Friday, I don't know. But we'll put a link to the video in our show notes as well. Now, while we're talking about Mario, Joe was very excited about this.
Absolutely.
Because Joe's favourite video game movie of all time. Actually, not even video game, but your favourite film
Favourite
ever.
film of all time.
Super Mario Brothers, the movie. You love that film. All right, great. It's probably not your favourite film ever, but you are a fan of it, yeah?
I'm a fan of it. I like to defend it. I don't think it's a bad film. I take it for what it's worth. But yeah, 26 years later, a deleted scene from Super Mario Bros. The movie, Super Mario Brothers the movie, has emerged online.
Is it the Bob Hoskins nude scene?
It is. No, it's not.
That hasn't surfaced yet.
That hasn't surfaced yet. No, interestingly, it's kind of like a deleted missing scene in the middle of the film.
Okay.
There's a bit where they're getting threatened to be de-evolved, and they push Cooper away, and they run away, and he slips over on some slime on the floor, and the slime. There's no explanation in the original film where that slime comes from. Now, I've seen there's things about the scripts and stuff like that, in the past saying, the slime, it's because if he de-evolved somebody, he showed them saying they'll turn them back into their primordial ooze, and he's going to do the same to them unless they comply. So everybody know, like, people have unearthed, like, oh yeah, this is what happens. But the actual scene has been found now. It's quite a long scene, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's this video that's about 15 minutes long, and there is actually a website completely dedicated to the Super Mario Brothers movie, smbmovie.com, and they spent years essentially uploading and cataloguing everything you ever wanted to know, and probably didn't want to know as well, about this movie. But they've also found a tape that's 15 minutes longer than the cinematic release version that features 50 minutes of extra footage that weren't in the movie. But interestingly, none of the video effects work's been done on these scenes.
Okay,
so they look a bit weird. But, I mean, there are some bits in here, especially that scene, which is this YouTube video here, and it shows you what happened. So I think, even seeing stuff like that, I do always find it interesting. Even movies you're not a huge fan of, but seeing the pre-production shooting and stuff. I always find that quite interesting. I was watching a video the other day, and there's a load of them for Ghostbusters.
Oh, is there?
And just little bits that they deleted, and then with the proton packs, but there's no beams coming out of it because he hadn't got the video effects working. Just seeing that kind of, on set, but without the effect, it's always a bit bizarre. But it's cool when stuff like this gets uncovered, I think. So.
I remember getting a pirate copy of Wolverine, and it was like, the film, and it was before they'd actually done any of the 3D effects.
Wow,
it's like suddenly halfway through, he'd be on string, or there'd be like a green screen or something. It was quite cool to watch, actually.
That must have leaked direct from the studio.
Yeah,
then.
It must have been.
That's pretty cool. So if you want to check out that, I mean, if like Joe, you are a huge fan of the Mario Brothers movie, getting another 50 minutes in your life, so was
absolutely.
a good thing, I guess. Now this week, Grand Theft Auto fans have been kicking off a bit.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So, we were talking about video game soundtracks and how video game soundtracks kind of changed into radio stations and commercial songs, licensed songs. Well, it turns out some of these licenses are running out. And, with Vice City actually happened. I didn't know about this, but Vice City, they had licensing issues with a few tracks, but they did it in a way that people would, when they originally bought the game, with those soundtrack, they could keep it, but then people in the future that bought it had to have those removed. Well, they've just done an update for San Andreas, and this update for San Andreas is pretty bad because what it does is it basically strips out quite a few songs that the licenses have already expired on. And, of course, there's an unofficial patch to add the songs back in.
Because it's still there,
available, yeah. But
doesn't it limit it to, like, this patch, the one they've put out, it limits it to like 2 songs per radio station or something like that.
It reduces it down a lot, and I think you're totally changing the atmosphere of a game if you want to listen to that tune on the radio. If you're replacing it, and this problem seems to be happening even more with Rockstar. So they're saying now GTA 4.
Yeah,
they're gonna have to remove most of the songs from the Russian pop station Vladivostok FM. They're going to replace some of those songs with a new set, and they'll update customers in the future. But I don't know, it just seems weird to me because some of those soundtracks were so legendary that they came out on CDs themselves. There were GTA Vice City releases on CD, San Andreas and GTA 4.
We're talking about San Andreas. I mean, Vice City to me was always a game I put on just to listen to the soundtrack. You know? So I love that 80s soundtrack anyway. But San Andreas was more like a hip-hop kind of...
Yeah,
well, they said there was a lot of...
stuff like that on it, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was some country ones as well, but the stuff from Vice City was like a lot of the Michael Jackson stuff and stuff. So.
That's interesting, though, because I guess, if you bought that game, obviously, on the PlayStation back in the day, on your PS2 or your Xbox, they can't remove it because it's pressed to a disc and that's it.
Yeah.
But now this affects the PC version.
Steam, yeah. So they rolled out the update on
the
Steam.
mobile version as well. They said they'd already done it in the mobile version.
Oh, wow.
I was just reading the article, and now it's the Steam version. They've done
I guess any version that they can pump an update out to.
Any version that they're still selling, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And on a console that's got updates supported,
Yeah.
That is bad, though, because, like you said, it is such a big part of the game. I mean, I was... Because, if you listen to a normal radio station in the car, it's different songs all the time. So, I mean, there is a part of that, I think, it's cool if they can update it and put, like, maybe slightly different ones in there. But there is something about knowing what you're going to get and look at... Especially a game that old that's been around for a long time.
Imagine if you're waiting for your one favourite tune to come up and it just never does.
And, I mean, that kind of... highlights a problem that back then they never expected that was going to be sold on the internet 20 years later.
Yeah,
so they just licensed songs for that one game, And the licenses that are made, like, back in the early 2000s when they were doing this, it probably was just a one-time deal.
Like, oh, here's a 10-year license, 15-year
but
license.
it's kind of like you're renting it, aren't you? You're just renting that song for that period, and then we'll remove it.
And then they think, oh, it's easier for us to just patch it so you can't listen to those songs anymore than renewing those licenses, I guess, because they don't want to pump that money into it.
Or they don't want to get sued either. Maybe we don't
know. Yeah, maybe they did try, and they turn around, but I don't think that's the case.
Look, it makes such a. I mean, if you played, Crazy Taxi without the Offspring soundtrack, it doesn't work.
Yeah. That happened on a recent mobile release of it, didn't it? And it kind of puts you off. You feel like you're not in the same world.
Yeah, it can make such a big difference. So it's not a good thing when that happens. And I think going forward, I mean, I'd hope that when they're making games today, they kind of put that in the contracts that re-releases,
like lifetime license.
It's a lifetime license, It
can't always be easy to do, I guess so. Now, before we chat to Heather Gibson, it's just quite an interesting story this week. We've often had a lot of bad press about video games. We were talking last week about the NHS clinic where, that for video
gaming addiction. Yeah.
Let's talk about a positive story about video games for a change. An article here on our New Scientist talking about the fact that video games could help reduce symptoms of mental health conditions.
Yeah, so they're talking about kind of maybe different inputs, different ways of controlling games. So there's a pair that have created a sailing game that reads your pulse.
Right.
So if your heart rate increases, the sea becomes more stormy.
Right, okay.
So if you can kind of slow your heart rate out, relax, it becomes a more relaxed kind of game. It's interesting to see how different parts of the body and different aspects of health can be used in gaming, and we've seen this a lot with the new Nintendo exercise.
Oh, the ring thing.
As well. That's a new kind of input, isn't it? And that's also measuring your heart rate and kind of measuring your reaction to it.
I mean, they're talking about it here. These are kind of laboratory games that they've made. They're not talking about playing Friday the 13th to, relax your mental health conditions, I imagine. But essentially, these are video games. If they're talking about, sailing game that, reads your pulse. And apparently it says here, as your heart rate increases, the in-game sea becomes more stormy, slowing down your progress as well. So you've kind of got to, work out how to psychologically slow your heart rate down.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and I guess you learn from that, and then you're thinking positive thoughts, calming your heart rate, calming down your breathing and stuff like that. So when this kind of happens in a real life situation where you panicked or you feel stressed or whatever.
Yeah, it could help people.
It helps people to think back, okay, how did I do that in the game? How do I do that right now?
And also, I guess a lot of games that we kind of play are designed to, get your heart rate going, get you kind of excited, or your fast reaction.
We don't think about how they could relax us, do we? So it's interesting to see the other spectrum.
And I remember in the 90s, there used to be lots of kind of relaxing games. You remember Tempest and the fireworks simulator as well and stuff like that. So
Abe's Odyssey always relaxed me for some reason.
Yeah. And I think there's a kind of a thing to look at here with mental health and kind of the pace of gaming.
We've had people get in touch with us before on Twitter talking about how, listening to this show and, revisiting games from their childhood and stuff like that is actually healthy for their mental health. It's a bit of escapism from everyday life. And I think that's always been a fact of video games, hasn't it?
Well, we had a great discussion about how kind of, some people were saying, talking about video games makes me, this was in our Discord, kind of maybe listening to the retro hour makes me feel a bit sad because I think of all the missed opportunities that I've had. And then another guy said, it makes me feel sad because I used to play games with my dad before he passed away. So there's connections with it. And then I say, oh, well, for me, gaming was an escape. So kind of talking about it now makes me happy.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to see the kind of psychology and discuss these things when it comes to gaming.
And it's good to see some mainstream press actually praising video games for what they can do rather than just putting it down all the time like they often do. So that's really so. I'll shove that in our show notes along with everything else we talked about this week at theretrohour.com. Little plug for our Discord as well. We chat in there most of the week.
Oh, yes. Just join our Discord. Click on the Discord icon on our website.
At theretrohour.com. Right then, let's get into this week's special guest joining us in the studio to get some stories about legendary games, of course. Going to be mostly about Tomb Raider. With this week's guest, Heather Gibson. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for our favourite bit of the show when we welcome on this week's special guest, joining us in the studio to unearth some amazing stories about legendary games like Tomb Raider 1 and 2. Welcome to the show, Heather Gibson.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. We love it when people come in to visit us as well. It's so much nicer than doing it over the phone or Skype or something like that. Even though you did get a bit wet getting off the train getting here, didn't you?
It was a bit wet. It was a bit cold on the platforms, but it's been worth the journey.
Well, let's make it worthwhile and get some great memories about, obviously Tomb Raider as well. What a game. And Lara Croft, what a character. I know over the weekend you were actually doing a little event in Derby that we were at as well. Yeah. And you kind of hooked up with some people you hadn't seen for a long time. Yeah,
it was great fun. Hooked up with Andy Sandham, who was one of the level designers for Tomb 3 onwards at Core. Tom Scott. Prolific sort of, I say, programmer. Quite a few other interesting ex-Core employees. And a few pints later, quite worse for wear by 1 a.m. But I've got to say that the day was phenomenal. It was lovely meeting some fans from Tomb Raider, and it was really nice to catch up with some of the guys that I'd worked with.
Well, let's get a bit about your history. I mean, what kind of originally got you into video games then? Do you remember where it all started, like the attraction of games?
Bizarrely, I started at a time in the world where you could basically apply for a job straight from an advertisement in the newspaper. And I was very lucky in that I was accepted at Rare Designs, basically on an advert.
Right.
The one thing I think that sort of maybe gave me a bit of an edge was being a woman. I'm not going to say that wasn't it wasn't anything sort of that stopped me getting any employment. It probably helped in some way because there was that sort of novelty female attitude at the time working in the company. But basically, the night before that I went for the interview, I popped up to my local newsagents because I knew that Rare worked in this form of art which included pixels, and I knew that the only way to put pixels into a game was sort of on graph paper or to show your art. And I literally just bought some graph paper, drew out a few characters on it, and that's what I went to Rare with in that initial interview and got the job.
That's how they're all done back then, though, isn't it, pixel art?
But that's exactly what you've done. I think I did it on ZX Spectrum paper because that was all the newsagents had. But I think it was the fact that I'd just done something that was relative to the job that was available, to be honest.
By the sounds of things, you didn't really have much experience with gaming before that, or
other than playing games.
Yeah.
I enjoyed playing games, ZX Spectrum games. I was from that era, so I've grown up with gaming. But as far as doing graphics for games, no. I was a keen artist, though, and I actually started my career off as a nanny. But that kind of bounced onto me being alongside an interior designer and then helping a friend doing some illustrations for children's books. Yeah. So all of those little tiny openings in your life, they lead to somewhere like Rare eventually.
That's pretty cool. So you mentioned there you've got experience of interior design. Did that help with designing Lara Croft's house?
It hasn't helped with designing my own house. I suppose it has. I mean, I could do a layout for a building, so I'd got some idea of architecture. But no, I think they pretty much knew that they needed a period dwelling. And when you'd only have to look around most stately homes in Britain to get a good idea of what we needed to achieve from that.
Well, which titles were they working on at Rare? And kind of what was the culture like there years before they went 3D?
So Rare was mainly working on Nintendo titles, so a lot of licenses, and very family-orientated games. As you can, I think they've pretty much stuck to that format. The only one that stood out to me as being quite a grown-up game was GoldenEye, just after we'd released Tomb Raider. But certainly as an environment to work in, it was totally different to core design. Rare had a very closed, kind of integrated work environment. I'm not going to say paranoid, but you certainly didn't talk about what you were working on at Rare, and you didn't play other games. You were very much funneled down the whole family game experience and Nintendo console. Which was a huge, massive difference from going to Core, where they had a very much more open door policy. People were playing other people's games and talking about other people's games, and ideas were much easily accepted.
Yeah, because everybody that we've talked to from Rare kind of talks about being isolated, trapped in a bar, at Tricross, or kind of away from the whole world, really, even the internet.
But you know what? It'd be really easy to criticise Rare, but I've got to say that 2 life-changing moments for me was the day that Rare employed me, and ironically the day that they made me redundant. Because while you're at Rare, you're very much brainwashed into believing you are in the best, most creative company, if not in the country, in the world. And it's not until you break that barrier, you get out of there, or get pushed out there, which was what happened to me, that you realise that this country's got a massive amount of creative ability.
So, I mean, you mentioned then about the redundancies and stuff at Rare. What was that kind of period like, and what kind of happened there?
I don't know. I think it was a kinder way than sacking me, actually, if I'm honest. I think myself and Rare were sort of... I'd been there, I think, 5 years by that stage. I wasn't very well paid. There were people starting the company that were getting paid more than me for doing less than me.
Never
you know
good.
What I mean?
Yeah.
That's never a good thing. You know, you got the lads turning up in company cars, and I was still rolling in a V-dub Beetle that was falling to pieces, you know. But as I say, it's easy to look back on that and say, well, you could get a bit sort of bitter about it, but I never was. I was always really proud to work in that building. And it was, as I say, it isn't until you look back that you think, crikey, why did I put up with it for so long, really? And why did they put up with me? Because I had a very different philosophy to the guys at Rare, who, once they were in the building, were happy to knock a football around after work and do social things with each other that were quite blokey. But I also used to like going out nightclubbing, so once a month I'd do the rave scenes, and I knew I couldn't go into Core on a Rare on a Monday morning and say I'd been raving all weekend. Yeah. They were very much a tea and cake kind of nice company that didn't want to know people that did nasty things like that.
Yeah, we've done panels with them. They're all talking about how, like, you know, a lot of the guys there would, over the weekend, they'd all hang out together and have breakfast together and stuff like that. But yeah.
Lovely if you want that family environment. But that perhaps was where we differed, in that I had my family at home.
So you mentioned the atmosphere there at Rare. What were the changes when you went to Core, and kind of how did the atmosphere change?
Well, the atmosphere right from entering the building on my interview was totally different. You know, people were smiling, walking around, having jokes, going into each other's rooms, talking about game ideas. It was all incredibly open. A good social scene as well. You know, people would meet up on a Friday night. We'd go back to people's houses. Just the opposite, complete opposite to what I'd experienced at Rare. And
was it kind of a smaller team or a bigger team?
Initially, it was quite small teams at Core. In all fairness, most of the teams that I'd also worked in Rare were small. It wasn't big teams at Rare. I mean, I'd worked on games at Rare where it was just myself and my programmer. And another interesting thing about Core, which I found, was at Rare, everything was very programmer-driven. So you were kind of, well, this is the game we're working on, and they're the graphics you've got to do. So it kind of didn't give you much in the way of being creative, because you were already funneled down that one route. Whereas at Core, I found that the programmers were there to code, and it was the artists that often led the games and what was created at Core. And the diversity in people, I mean, I found this at Rare and at Core. You'd got personalities on the one side, the programmers who were very geeky, and then on the opposite side of that, you'd got the artists who were mental, just usually comprehensive kids that were good at art. Very few of the public schoolboy types in the art department, more so in the... So it just worked so well, though, as a fusion of people.
Well, you worked on a Mega Drive game, Skeleton Crew.
I did.
Before. Yeah, that was quite a dark game, though, wasn't it, as well?
It was dark. It was... I just said that to Ravi earlier, is not one I'm bothered about putting my name to. It was a lovely little isometric game, but as with all isometric games, and especially when you try and do a shooter, it's a great idea in principle, but you try actually hitting something when you're spinning around in a circle and moving in the opposite direction at the same time.
Did it kind of get criticised for the control?
I don't even think anybody noticed Skeleton Crew, to be honest. I think it slipped under the radar until now, thank you very much.
But that isometric kind of period, though, 'cause I mean, you obviously had the stuff on the Spectrum like Batman and those kind of games. And it kind of went away for a bit, but that kind of brought it back, it seemed.
My favourite game of all time, isometric game, Cannon Fodder, those kind of games, and Sensible Soccer, all those games where it worked really, really well.
So obviously with the isometric games with like Skeleton Crew, they kind of had that kind of like faux 3D kind of games. How ready was Core for like the next generation of 3D gaming? Was it quite difficult, or were they ready for it?
No, hey, do you know what? We didn't know what was coming, really. You're so driven, really, by the dev kits that you've got in front of you and the engines or the editors that you've been given. And kind of, I suppose to some degree, the idea that was in Toby's mind of doing a 3D game began to materialise when we all got really, really familiar with programmes such as 3D Max. Yeah. And as soon as everybody got hold of that programme and you could create a 3D world, the idea to put that into a game was fairly natural. So anyway, Toby knocks up this phenomenal tomb. I remember it now, and you'd got dust motes floating in an Egyptian tomb and a sarcophagus in the middle and a light beam coming in. And I think Jez or Adrian just walked into the room and just went, wow.
So that was obviously an early version of Tomb Raider.
So that 3D mock-up, in some respects, just opened everybody's eyes that what this game could do. But implementing that from something like Max into a usable game was mind-blowing. And then, again, by chance, this guy approaches Core from Cambridge University, who is a great mathematician. I think he'd got his degree in AI, Gavin Rummery. And the minute he walked into Core and took a look at what Toby was doing, and had a bunch of artists that had only done 2D work, he started creating the room editor. And all of a sudden, we had a tool that we could work with on the fly, build a room, explore the room, output it immediately. So we weren't waiting hours for something to be rendered in Max, which was the case then. You know, when you hit render for your lighting in Max, you went away and had a chat with somebody for half an hour and came back again. We were outputting it within minutes.
You try and do every frame had to be like that, I guess, before,
But also the anim editor that Paul Douglas wrote, which allowed us to create the animations for Lara, not in Max, not in a modelling package, but within his own editor, and texture that in real time, was something. Even now, it staggers me. I know people talk about Tomb Raider, a game that was groundbreaking, but for me, those two pieces of kit was something that I think were 10, 15 years ahead of themselves.
Well, how far was Lara Croft kind of developed? Because I've heard she was originally named Laura Cruz. And,
she was.
How did they kind of develop her personality and character?
Well, originally, I think that Toby had a bit of a crush on Nina Cherry.
Right.
As I remember his very first drawings being almost like a copy of her, but
royalties cashing in when she is.
I know. And the other thing a lot of people don't realise about Lara is that a storyline has developed as she's become more popular. And I do remember that somewhere in Lara's profile, for instance, Toby had put something like, a journalist had asked, well, who's she romantically interested in? And I think his response was Brian Blessed was like the one man that Lara had a crush on. So this is what I'm saying. We kind of made it up as we went along. A lot of Lara's profile and her background, her history all came from, well, somebody's asked the question, so we better write the bit of history. And it was almost a bit jokey to begin with.
Was she always meant to be a bit like, a proper English kind of lady, though? Was that always in there, or did that just kind of...
I think yes.
Right.
I think that from the get-go, she definitely was. As far as name-wise, I think that was more for we needed something that sounded less European and more British. So that was the quick and obvious thing to do, was just change that surname. But we always thought Laura Cruz had a lovely ring to it. It's just we wanted to make her sound a bit more British. We were proud to be British developers, so why not?
How did they end up finding the voice of Lara, and what were the kind of directions?
Oh, gosh, do you know the story about the voice of Lara? Anything at all about it?
Little bits I've heard.
So you do know that I did the voice of Lara in game?
I
Wow.
did not know that. No.
In Tomb Raider 1.
Joe actually did say that. You thought you were, yeah.
You are correct, but
Yeah.
not many people. I don't tend to. But I will tell you some funny stories about it.
The other day, he said, "Oh, she's done some of the voice as
Yeah.
well." So I thought,
We're going to play a game in a minute.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, this is a really good game. Now, when I went into the recording studio with our sound effects guy, he used to do the ambient sounds and the in-game sounds for Tomb Raider, Martin Iverson. He said, well, we're going to have to record some in-game sounds with every intention, I think, of taking my voice and then replacing it with a proper actress in the game later on. But it kind of never happened. So anyway, my voices in game, if you'll remember, were very limited. It was yes, no. And then there was the one where you have to strain to push a block. Okay, so
I know which one it
so
is.
Martin's saying to me, "You've got to make a strain sound," and he just saying that makes you giggle. So 20 minutes later, after I'd been picked up from a fit of laughter on the floor, I'm standing in front of a mic, and now I want you all to just have a go at making a strain sound.
Go on, gives you best, Lara Croft.
I know which one she's on about, and it's proper like kind of noise,
Yes.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Because Martin actually said to me, well, try and think of something that you do that makes you strain. So there's a little fact that's the sound that I make
Are we not going to get a little snippet right now?
when I'm pushing a block.
That's amazing. I love the
I
fact
think, Dan, you should have a go. Come on, you didn't do it. A real proper make the strain sound.
that good enough.
Yeah.
That was actually pretty. Yeah, that was pretty good actually.
But then you'd have Martin there go, make it longer, make it longer, make it louder.
You can tell her practices at home.
The one thing that I failed really badly on, though, was the scream, because I've never been a girly screamer. In fact, I don't think I've ever screamed at anything in my life, and my screams were really, really appalling. And I think it was that stage that they went, I think we're going to have to get a voice actress.
That's great. They left it in there, though, as well. That's, so, you think a lot of the time now, I mean, I read stories back then about, when they'd have FMV in games and, voice acting. It'd often be done by people who worked on the crew because, there wasn't the budget, or they didn't think they needed,
no, everybody that worked on it was dragged in. I mean, actually, Judith, who did eventually do the FMV voice for Lara, was the sister of one of the guys that worked at Core.
Yeah.
Oh.
So he just said, well, my sister does that sort of thing. She'll come in and
do it.
and she'll record it for you.
Oh wow!
But it worked. It worked brilliantly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's gone down in history.
Yeah, I don't know if she was even paid very well. I'm sure by the time we got to Lara 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, however many numbers, the voiceover actress were in great sort of having their demands met. But you see, they're the things, they were the frills, they were sort of the icing on top for us. The FMVs, I mean, I've got to say, I'm not a big fan of FMVs. I am one of those gamers that goes, oh, for God's sake, I just want to get to the next level.
Skip.
Yeah. It's not the done thing now. FMVs, there's more money goes into FMVs than there is the game. People appreciate them. But ours were pretty basic. They were there just to string a storyline to give you and give you a reason just to get to the next level.
Well, let's talk about, the development of Tomb Raider, because I know, weirdly, most people associate it obviously with the PlayStation 1, but it actually came out on the Sega Saturn first, didn't it?
Yeah.
And I heard there was some rush to get it out on the Saturn first. What was kind of the story there?
So that's the politics behind it all. I think I can give you a small insight into it, but I think possibly one of the old producers or even somebody like Troy Horton would be able to fill you in on the full story. I think there was a deal originally done on the Sega, and it was a difficult platform to work on. Alongside our dev kit, we had a programmer working on the PlayStation version and a programmer working on the Sega version sort of at the same time. So the logistics of which one should have come out first, or whether or not Sony nipped the margin and paid us more to release it on the PlayStation, I'm not 100% sure. But I certainly remember some of Toby's original artwork, promotional posters. The first promotional poster that I ever saw was for the Sega, and that was a hand-drawn piece of art. So,
because that platform, obviously, I mean, it wasn't anywhere near the success that the PlayStation was, but I guess we didn't know that at the time.
Well, nobody did. I mean, there was a lot of people in the building that were pretty much tossing a coin. It was like your Betamax and VHS syndrome. It was kind of, either one of these could do it. But I think ultimately the PlayStation platform was more geared to doing 3D than the Saturn.
I remember hearing stories about, developers and companies that looking like Sony, they make hi-fis. They're not going to get anywhere in the gaming industry. And they came along and owned the entire thing.
Yeah.
A lot of the levels involved a lot of puzzles in the original, couple of Tomb Raiders. How did you kind of make sure that those puzzles weren't too difficult, made sure that they were difficult enough to keep people engaged? Did you use play testers, or did you just kind of guerrilla style do it yourself?
We did it ourselves. I mean, that was the thing. The output straight away was a good thing to test it for. You could put something down on paper, you could put it into the game, and if it didn't work, it was easy to change. And it was kind of the format in those days as well, to make the game harder as you went along. You ease somebody in on the first few levels, and then by the final level, they want to kill themselves, basically, just to get to the next save point. And we know that because people used to write to us and tell us. But the thing is, we did have a fantastic testing crew as well. So you did always get feedback. I'll tell you, the biggest transformation I found, or the hardest thing to deal with, was coming off PC testing, which was how we were producing the game, and then for the first time picking up a PlayStation controller to test the final versions. That's when it felt to me that I was a new player. And there was an awful lot of times that I thought, oh my God, what have I made these poor people do? They've got to jump off that floating island there, do a full spin in the air, then hit the grab button within an umph of a second. So there are a few bits that I think if I'd have had the PlayStation controller, I would have made slightly easier. But the irony of that is the people that got it were delighted that they made one of the hardest jumps you could ever expect anybody to make in a game. But there was a funny story. There was a guy that wrote to Core, actually, or directed his letter to Gavin Rummery. He said something like, I'm 75 years old, Mr. Rummery. I have been playing Tomb Raider now for 6 months, Mr. Rummery. I haven't got long in this world, Mr. Rummery. So if you could please tell me how to get past such and such in level 4, Mr. Rummery, I would be eternally grateful. And that was another great thing about Core, is we had that direct contact with the public. If people wrote letters, it got to the team. There was nothing siphoned out.
Not like now in big companies where you go through red tape and probably PR departments.
Well, no, yeah,
I
suppose the PR departments are there to work alongside Twitter and any blogs. But in those days, it came down to, even an email was fairly new. It came down to a postcard or a letter, and they were great.
Well, Tomb Raider was kind of the first use I saw of huge amount of really detailed textures, and you use them to build these environments. How did you choose the right textures, and how did you make the colours stand out like tigers compared to the background?
Right. So again, another thing that I'd learnt to do from my 8-bit days and 16-bit days was you did a thing to a piece of art which was called anti-alias in it. So it's effectively taking one colour and putting another colour, one pixel colour, and alongside that the next pixel almost blurs the one before. So Photoshop and things like that just do it instantaneously with things like the blend tool. But in those days you did literally just have to sit there and pick the next colour on the spectrum or the next tone and put it next to the one before. So the blending between the tiling of the textures, there did involve quite a lot of hand work to that. You did have to overwork those textures, and you did have to blend, because they could come over as very, very pixely if all you did was take a photograph and try and apply it straight to the game. So I always say anti-aliasing helped that, but there was a bit behind it. Then on top of that, you've got where do I get these textures from? Because there was no way Jeremy was going to fly us to Egypt to take a photograph of the tomb. So this is how you did it in those days. You waited on Pipec style for about an hour for a site to come up, Or you did the old-fashioned thing. You walked around town to all the bookshops and you actually bought historic books with lots of pictures in from historical places. And that's effectively what we did. Me and Neil used to go up to the local bookshops. There was 3 in Derby that used to do second-hand books or reject books. And we'd literally come out with piles and piles of encyclopedias, books about Egypt, even penguin books. God, if there was one thing in that book and it only cost 50p, we were dragging it back to core and then we were scanning it. And then once we'd scanned it, we could flatten the image in Photoshop, tweak it, anti-alias it, and put it into the backgrounds. But there really isn't a lot of textures in Tomb Raider. If you actually looked at the texture file, you'd be surprised how few textures are there. So we kind of had one standard texture of rock face or Egyptian sand and a rock face. And then you had your prettier textures, which were more to focus the player, like where the switches were or edges of temples.
Well, Croft Manor, of course, one of the most famous areas of the Tomb Raider games. I mean, is it true that Croft Manor was based on the core building?
I don't think it was. I think there's been a lot of speculation over Croft Manors. Which house in Britain was it? I mean, it was Toby's concept.
Right.
Toby's concept. It was pretty much put to me, between me and Toby, we put together the Croft Manor. I think Toby did the facade and I did the inside. And it really was let's just decorate this room that we know has got to be the playground for the player to get used to their controls.
It was a great way of doing a tutorial, though.
Yeah, well, again, it was how do you do it? It was a pretty mammoth task asking somebody just to drop into the game and expect to play it. I think that was something that was really a huge insight. So whoever, I don't know who it was that decided to make that. It probably was Toby, just made that decision to have a test area.
It was a legendary decision, really.
Yeah.
So
you didn't lock butlers in the fridge at core then.
That's on number 2.
Yeah.
that's number
That didn't happen in real
Of course,
life.
the butler farts as well. You do know that. If you know the move, and Laura doesn't take her clothes off. So there you go. That's all the myths.
That was
gone
Joe's
there.
question. Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. I've actually had the ask her how they settled on Lara's titty size.
Oh. Do you know, I was saying to Ravi while we were standing outside earlier, I got interviewed earlier this year by BBC Two. I think that was live, and I'd been pre-interviewed before that with a very nice gentleman who does the tea conversation of, oh, how are you? What do you do now? And how did you get into the industry? So the kind of things that most people maybe don't want to know, but are interested in listening to once we get rolling. But of course, the Radio 1 broadcaster that interviewed me, who was a woman, immediately said, how do you feel about how Lara Croft was portrayed, and do you think it was an awful portrayal and she was a sexual beast by the end? And I was like, oh no, I'm a woman, I've got big boobs, right? I've got them too. You can't help what you're born with, you've just got to live with it, okay? There was no, I mean, on a serious note, if you look at Lara in the first 2 games, she was designed to be a beautiful, athletic woman, a woman that we all aspire to be. She wasn't a blonde bimbo.
Yeah.
You know, he could have gone down the whole sexual route with her, and he really didn't.
She was the opposite, really. She was intelligent, she was athletic.
Exactly. All them things that would probably be on the other side of the bimbo girl. But ultimately, you know, there was that conflict with marketing, which again has been written about in magazines and we've talked about before. But in all honesty, in defence of IDOS, what marketing does really well is let's focus on the subject and make people stop and look. And if there's anything better for guys to stop and look at, you tell me, is, you know, Lara full spread on FMV or at the side of a bus. You know, so at that time, and we've got to say this is very time specific, the Spice Girls were being hailed as being, you know, this revolutionary girl band. But at the end of the day, they still weren't on stage with a pair of shorts on and a basque, for God's sake. They weren't walking out in overalls, were they?
And kind of Sony were desperate for a mascot of any type for the PlayStation.
In some ways, Lara was a celebration, I think, of female independence. That's how I looked at it anyway. Toby, at the end of the day, he had a very personal take on his creation and how that got slightly warped. But I think even he, by the end of it, could see that there was sense in what Eidos had done.
Well, because some people say that he left Core kind of stating that he was saddened and disappointed with the Lara Croft sex appeal in marketing.
Yeah, I think we all were. And what I'm saying now is on retrospect. When you look back in history, and I think the older you get, you've got to be able to do that. You've got to say why did things go that way? I tried everything to convince Toby to stay, but I think to an element there was a bit of burnout as well. I think we all felt a bit like that on the team. So it didn't take much to push any one of us over the edge.
Well, with Tony not on board, I mean, were you a bit worried about, Tomb Raider 2 when they said they were going to do the sequel? Was it kind of, you think, oh, he's not on board now?
No, we really tried to convince Toby to stay and work on Tomb Raider 2. It just wouldn't have been the same without him. But we'd got the tools up and running and just getting things like the room editor to a stable point, because throughout Tomb Raider 1, we were creating levels and getting crashes. I was constantly saying to Gav, oh, for God's sake, it's crashed again. I've just half built a temple. I've lost it all. We got through that stage. By Tomb 2, the editor was actually working well. I felt that the pressure was actually off because I understood, I'd got a clear idea of what I was doing at that stage. But it is sad that both Toby and Paul left. They were a huge contribution to Tomb Raider 1 and they were sadly missed on 2. In all honesty, by the end of 2, we were kind of ready to say goodbye to Lara Croft and Tomb Raider as well.
Oh, well, it definitely didn't happen, obviously. But
you've dragged it all back up again now. 20 years later, I thought I'd got away scot-free.
Got away from her, but no, we're still knocking at the door asking about Lara.
It's funny. It's a very current thing. I've noticed this has only happened over the last 10 years. 10 years. 2 years. There's suddenly this resurging interest in British gaming. And I think it's really, really nice.
Yeah.
And before I'm on a Zimmer frame or in a wheelchair or an old folks' home, it's kind of nice to have a bit of memory to talk about those days if people are interested in hearing about it.
Well, even the fact you go to Derby now, they've got Lara Croft Way and stuff. It's like, it's a cultural icon.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, the fact that these characters change the world. You've got Hollywood movies about these characters that you guys were working on.
I know. We couldn't get our head around the movie. Couldn't. In fact, I can remember being a little bit disappointed that it was a movie. I was like, well, really should be done like an FMV. This should be all animated in what we now say CGI.
Yeah.
I don't think that term was around at the time. There were manga movies and things like that being made, but that's how I saw the movie for Lara Croft.
Might have got reviewed better as well if they'd done that.
Yeah, possibly. I do remember that one bit where she's walking towards camera and there's the ice scape, isn't there? She's like, I'm not fun. Oh my God.
Dear. Well, we mentioned... I was going to say Lara Croft 2 then, Tomb Raider 2 earlier on, and I mentioned how the tutorial of number 1 was absolutely legendary. Where did the idea come for Tomb Raider 2 for the absolute phenomenal legend of the butler? Where did that kind of come from?
God. I know, I think it was my idea to lock him into the freezer. Because it just worked really
I love the fact he kind of came out the freezer a bit as well, didn't he?
He did. The clipping was a tiny bit off, wasn't it? Yeah. I think we could have done worse things than that, really. It was nice. He was just an added character to that whole English scenario. That's how it started off, having the butler. But you could easily see he was a spin-off to Lara quite early on, and that you could have an awful lot of fun with him just because he was so useless, really. He was just there, wasn't he, really?
And his sound effects were great as well.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
You didn't do them too, did you?
No.
I love the fact even today, if I've got like a tray of cups or anything, I'll rattle them a bit and everyone knows what you're doing.
Yeah, they do.
Are you pleased then? Because the Croft Manor is essentially part of the series now. It's been in Tomb Raider 3, Tomb Raider Legend, Tomb Raider Anniversary, and even Rise of the Tomb Raider, where she has a flashback to being a little girl and she has to scale Croft Manor.
Oh, you see, this is part of Lara's history, so it has to be included in everything, doesn't it?
Like a fancy brown glass.
Unlike any of the levels. The levels have been there, done that. But her home will always be her home, so it has to be there in her whatever game she's in.
So adding vehicles was quite a big step. What was the idea there and how did that kind of change the...
It was kind of that whole, we've got to do something a bit different, else people are just going to go, just rolling out the same old. So it was an easy thing to relatively easy thing to implement. The idea was an easy idea, but the implication of it in the game was a bit tricky.
Yeah, level design will have to change, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, quite a lot of the time, the animation for the vehicle hadn't been finished by the time the level had been built. So all of a sudden you're given a skidoo and you're like, oh my God, I haven't made that road long enough. I keep crashing into the wall, so you quickly fly around the levels and readjust them. In fact, Gavin, we hadn't got the boat sorted out for the Venice level, and I was building the Venice level. So I actually had to say to Gavin, who was coding the boat, I think, that night, when you've coded the boat, you're going to have to do some map design, mate. I said, you're going to have to just do the route. I said, it doesn't have to be textured or anything, but just do the route, the length the boat can go to and how much of a corner it needs to turn, you know. So he actually did the layout for one of the Venice levels, the boat level, and I just textured it all up and triggered it and did the juicy bits. But yeah, that's Gav's layout because we didn't know how the boat moved. Wow. So yeah, you just didn't have time. You got to remember, we only had 1 year from. We'd only just released Tomb 1, and then boom, straight into Tomb 2 for a Christmas release that year.
Yeah, I think that Christmas was it's so important in video games even now, isn't it? That
money,
market, yeah.
And it was just a kind of tweak of the original Tomb Raider engine, wasn't it? But it had stuff like a much easier level editor as well, which must have made your life much better.
It had a level editor that didn't crash as much. It still crashed, but not as much. We implemented almost the instant jump, which actually came from Stuart Atkinson, who took over the Lara Croft model, who always got frustrated with the whole go to the edge of a block, jump back to know your position, then jump to catch. It was the perfect way to make a jump, and you could always get it right. But Stu just clicked that there was another way of doing that. From almost an instant jump, she would snap to position.
So Tomb Raider 2 ended up actually being a bigger success than Tomb Raider 1. It was actually my first experience of Tomb Raider. Was that like a relief for you guys and the guys at Core when that was bigger, or was that kind of expected?
I don't know with sales figures. We kind of kept our heads down, so I'm not sure if it was bigger, but it's nice. But I think the thing is, the buzzword was out there that she'd already kind of made her place in the market. So there's that possibility that people were just waiting for that next game. I mean, I'd be interested to look back, say, to the original Call of Duty games, which I remember the original Call of Duty game on PlayStation. I cried. I actually wept when I landed. I think it was on the Dunkirk beaches or somewhere like that. And I don't know, to me, that was like something I'll never forget, was experiencing that game. But we might all find that perhaps Call of Duty 2 or 3 had much bigger sales, but it doesn't mean to say that the game itself wasn't a better game.
Yeah.
Well, I know recently they did a Tomb Raider anniversary concert because the soundtrack is just absolutely amazing.
Nathan McCree.
Did you attend it?
I did, yeah. I'm very honoured to attend that. Nathan's been working really hard. He's been fortunate enough to be given permission by Crystal Dynamics to use his original music score, and had a massive fan base with a lot of people that he's had to keep happy because he's used a Kickstarter campaign to get it all up and running. But the end result really was phenomenal. And again, another one of those moments, because I hadn't actually heard the Tomb Raider theme tune for 20 years, just for sitting there and actually listening to a classical concert in, I think it was the Apollo in London, of that music sweeping over you, kind of a tear in my eye kind of moment. But definitely worth attending. I think they're trying to plan something. There's a little bit of a secret, maybe not, but they're trying to plan something at Darley Abbey next year in Derby. Is the possibility if Nathan could do something there for the locals. I think he's up for it.
We'd be there, wouldn't we?
We're there.
Yeah, it really is wonderful. What he's done with the score is amazing.
I mean, that was such a big part of the game as well. I mean, people often forget how important music is in games. But I think, especially if you look at Tomb Raider and, like, kind of the first it had and what a revolutionary era that was. I mean, you had, the fully textured 3D graphics coming in, CD audio. And you think a couple of years before that, we were playing Mega Drive and Amiga games and stuff. And it was, really did such a big change.
But again, that all came from Toby's passion, really, for movies. I mean, the thing is, Toby's passion for movies, in some respects, led to the creation of Lara Croft. He had this obsession with spaghetti westerns. Sergio Leone, that kind of big sound to a big movie, big events. And I remember that initially when Nathan started doing the music. I don't know if Nathan would agree with me on this, but I think that's how Toby directed him, that he wanted something much more classical than plinky. You know, you got to remember, we're not that far from the days of Commodore 64 plinky plonky music, xylophone music, really. And he wanted that big movie soundtrack.
And also, I think it was one of the first games where they had music that was triggered by events.
Definitely.
So I remember, you know, it would get dramatic. The music would come on, and you'd be like, "Right, where's the enemy?"
Oh yeah,
You know?
straight away T-Rex level.
Yeah, I
I
was
can
gonna
hear
say
it
that.
now.
I was literally T-Rex.
And you were like,
I
"Oh
think
my god!"
when the bear comes in the first one, it's still terrifying as well. What's going on?
Yeah, and that was really the thing. Is the editor was a beautiful bit of kit for doing stuff like that, because we were triggering enemies from a floor tile in the editor. And we were triggering sounds from a floor tile. We knew when Lara hit that floor tile, sound would play.
Oh, that's floor tiles.
Or we knew when she entered the room, there was an ambient sound dedicated to that room. So it was something really simple for the artists to use. Now, that was something that previously only a programmer would have done that. They would have set all those scenes up. Because we had an editor as artists and we knew our scene and we knew where our baddies were being triggered from, we could trigger the point where the music and the magic happened.
Well, you're also working on Project Eden as well.
Oh, yes.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, tell us a bit about that title. What was the idea behind that and how did that develop?
Oh, I think we'd gone crazy by Project Eden, actually. I think we were so desperate to bog ourselves down with even more work. We came up with Project Eden, which was actually Gav's baby. So that was a programmer-led game. In sort of theory, it's a 4-player game, so that's put to you, and each one of the characters has their own abilities. But as a level designer, you try creating a game where every single character has their own specific set of abilities and they've got to get each other through a level. It caused quite a few headaches and sleepless nights, I can tell you. But, I mean, it was a beautiful game. We did everything we could to our best and it just didn't do as well as Tomb Raider.
It was very kind of cyberpunky, wasn't it? It reminded me of Syndicate.
Yeah. In all fairness, I think we could have taken one character out of that game with one of their abilities and created a game around it. There were so many mini games in Project Eden. It was frightening. For instance, I did a bit where you walked up a corridor and there was a key in a case in an old disused building, and the character's usual push button animation, instead of pushing the button, smashed the case. Okay, so the key falls out of the case at that stage and falls between a crack in the floorboard. Then you get your RC, which is a little remote control rover, and you activate that to go under the floorboards to collect the key to bring it back to you. Now, that was just a 5-minute bit in a game that there was hundreds of little bits like that in Project Eden. But nobody actually got to play them because I don't think they bought it.
Well, it was meant to come out in the Dreamcast, I remember. I don't think it ever did it? It was,
No. No, I think in fairness that the money was on Lara at that stage. We were kind of, do you know what? You stay at core. You don't go at the end of Tomb Raider 2. You stay at core over there and you can work on what you like for 3 years. And that was kind of, it was almost like a little retirement game in some respects.
Why did you eventually leave?
I fell pregnant with my daughter, so it was time for me to be a mum. I was just at that age. Didn't really intend on coming back because of my experience as a nanny. I kind of realised that kids actually do want to spend time with their mums. I know it's unheard of these days, but I thought I'm in a position financially where I can do that. And not a lot of women are these days. Most people are struggling to pay mortgages. Both partners have to work. But I was in a position I could do it, so I wanted to do it. And timing-wise, core was kind of coming to an end then as well. So, I mean, Jeremy was already, I think, out of the building, just as I'd had Mia. Gav was running it. Just heart was gone out of it. I think IDOS had sold on by that stage.
I think it was a bit of burnout as well.
Bit of burnout from the teams.
Yeah.
You know, when you've got teams that are trying to kill Lara at the end of the game, you know it's time to pass that game on to somebody else if they want it, really.
What do you think of the legacy of Lara these days? I mean, have you played the current games? Do you?
I've played some of them. Not so much. I'll always look at reviews and I'll always do the YouTube vids if I don't have time to play them. I'm not actually in a position to really get stuck into a good first-person game. I do still game, but I'm very much a Xbox, 10 minutes on Call of Duty.
Yeah.
I like the social aspect of gaming as well, so I don't like that isolated single-player experience. And in all fairness, if I had the choice even then, I would go for the sociable game rather than the isolated
And even
game.
the new Lara Crofts are kind of very solo, aren't they?
Yeah. And I think that's great. And I think there's going to always be an audience for those people who just want to immerse themselves in that very sort of isolated way of playing. But for me, part of gaming is having a laugh online and, you know, like a majority of your listeners, there's no harm in saying that you want to have fun when you play games.
And it's kind of strange because the latest Lara Croft games have started to turn into survival ones. I find myself spending more time in the woods catching rabbits and doing up my bow, you know.
I think they were beginning to get a little bit criticised, and so it's certainly something I'd mentioned a couple of years ago was they'd managed to keep this movie format with the game, but the games were very sort of linear. It was almost like, you can do all these amazing things, but you have to do them in this order. It kind of went away a little bit from that initial exploration feeling that we got with the original Tomb Raider. So maybe it's just that actually they're giving players the chance to explore a little more again.
Well, Heather, it's been incredible getting these stories about, you know, these incredible games that we all grew up playing.
Hope it's not bored you too much.
Absolutely not. Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure.